Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming on to the webinar today. If you're seeing this live or seeing as a recording, we're going to have a fantastic time together. So really, really excited to bring to light a lot of information about gut health. We have our expert here, Desiree Nielsen. We're so excited to interview her today on behalf of BioK. So it's a really exciting time in getting into gut health. And Desiree is a registered dietitian in Vancouver, Canada, with over 15 years experience in plant-based nutrition and chronic digestive health conditions such as IBS, Crohn's disease, and she is the author of 3 Canadian best-selling cookbooks, including Good For You Gut, as well as the host of the evidence-based wellness podcast, All Sorts podcast. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so excited to have you. And I am Kelly Springer. I'm a registered dietitian here in the US, also working with BioK. I'm personally taking BioK. And so we're going to dive in and say welcome to you, Desiree.
Thank you so much. I am so, as we were talking before, I love talking about this. I love getting super nerdy about all things like microbiome, probiotics, and the gut. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Cannot wait. So tell us a little bit first, because we just were talking before we started the webinar today. How did you find out about BioK?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's been a long time now, back before we were all over the apps. My very first job as a dietitian was at this local chain of health food stores that were kind of like a Whole Foods, but like family owned and local to where I live. And like my first 6 months on the job, I got so tired of saying, I don't know anything about probiotics. I don't know anything about probiotics that I went down to the supplement shelf and I pulled everything off the shelf and just went to my lap. I was like, is there any research on any of these things that we sell? And that's how I found back in like 2008. That's how I found BioK Plus. And safe to say, I've been a fan ever since.
I love that story. We were talking to, I got into digestive health because my daughter, who's now 18, heading to London to college for law, which is crazy. But when she was 5 years old, she was diagnosed with SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And at that time, no one had the answers on what this was. How do we work with it? So I got to work with incredible Dr. Sudaraj out of Syracuse University to teach me all about the gut biome. And since then, I've just been loving learning. So let me ask you our first question. How does the gut microbiome influence how we feel?
Yeah, it seems absolutely incredible that like these tiny microscopic organisms living in your gut of all things could really have any impact on like anything other than how you're pooping. And it's interesting because I think as the awareness of the microbiome grows and people get really excited about it, there can be a tendency to be like, the microbiome is everything, which I also remember early in my career learning about vitamin D and seeing all the research come out. And I was like, vitamin D is the most important vitamin in the entire world. So, as we get into this, because there's going to be some cool things that we talk about, it's important to note that, the microbiome is one piece that now we know more about. But of course, the way that we eat, the way we move our body, how we sleep, the stress, all of those, you can think of them as pillars. And with the microbiome, we're just adding this other pillar to our awareness of overall health. So, a couple of things to know about the gut. I mean, right off the top, the way that we learn about it in, school as dietitians, it is this machine that harnesses the nutrients and the food that we eat. Without it, game over. So, it's really important that our gut works properly simply to harness nutrition from the foods that we eat. But it is so much more than that. Our gut lies at the intersection of nervous system, immune system, and digestive health. And then, of course, all along the length of your digestive tract, but really concentrated in your ascending colon. So it's like if you put a little hand on your right lower abdomen, like that's where most of your gut microbes are living. And these microbes, the trillions of microbes there, influence everything. So, from the pH of your gut, and we can talk about what that means in a second, to the actual health of the gut tissue itself, because in there living and fermenting, the microbes create short chain fatty acids that are the primary fuel source for your gut cells. So like they're like, thanks for giving us a home. Like we're just going to give you this stuff that you can then use to fuel your own metabolism, which is pretty cool. But it also interacts with your immune system and your nervous system health too, which we can get a little bit into. So there's like multiple ways. And yes, we can talk about, constipation and all of those things, but it is actually incredibly complex the way your gut microbes influence your overall health.
It is complex. And when we talk about, like you said, trillions of bacterial cells, right? And so it's interesting that we're just learning more and more information about it over the past like real decade when we've been living with these microbes all along. So when we're thinking about, what is a probiotic exactly and how does it affect the gut microbiome?
Yeah. So probiotics are really interesting, and we can really think of this sort of spectrum to understand why probiotics matter. You can think of it as this spectrum of prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. So probiotics are the microbes themselves. So these are bacteria and sometimes yeast that come from the human microbiome. So they're things that are already living in maybe not our guts, but another human's gut. They are the live active microbes. And the definition of them as like a supplement is that in order to be a probiotic, it needs to be alive, very important, living microorganisms that when you give them in adequate amounts, that's also super important. You need to give enough of them to have an impact. And then the final sort of piece of the probiotic puzzle is that when you give these live microbes in adequate amounts, they confer a health benefit. So, like, just like not all bacteria make us sick, not all live bacteria are actually probiotics until we have the research to tell us what they do in the human body, whether it's like help with diarrhea or constipation or IBS or, like maybe even with inflammation. The probiotics are the thing, but the prebiotics are really important because the prebiotics are food for probiotics. So while we're, trying to keep a really healthy microbiome and maybe using probiotics to do that, we also need to make sure that we feed them well. And when we do those two things together, we get what are the postbiotics. So it's essentially like, what's the result of having these happy, healthy bacteria eating in your gut? It's these postbiotics, which we're most excited about things called short chain fatty acids, which appear to have impacts on our nervous system, our immune system health. They can change inflammatory status, all those kind of things. So feed the good bugs well, and they're going to do a whole bunch of really awesome stuff for you.
I love that. That you really truly nailed down the best way to explain it, and that was perfect. I always say for those prebiotics that fiber is my favorite F word. And if we could get in more of those fiber-rich sources to feed those gut bacteria, that we would keep those amazing trillion bacteria alive and thriving and to get those postbiotics, right?
And I think fiber is such a perfect place to sort of illustrate how probiotics and the gut microbiome itself impacts you. Like take constipation, for example. We know as dietitians that when 95% of Americans are like not eating enough fiber, that drives constipation, which is a huge issue for so many of us. So fibers impact constipation all on their own, but then the fibers we eat also impact the bacteria living in our gut. And there are fibers that aren't so fermentable, like they just sort of pass through, and that's really great for making good poops. But other fibers are fermentable. That means that the microbes, because they don't get digested and absorbed, they travel on through the gut where the microbes living in our colon can ferment them to do all those great postbiotic things. And so when we eat a really balanced variety of fibers from like all these different plant foods, not only are we taking care of just like how our gut operates in general, but we have this secondary benefit of maintaining a really healthy microbiota.
Oh, that is amazing. I love, again, the explanation was so dead on and perfect, right?
Mhm.
So, what do you look for when you're looking for a probiotic?
Yeah, this is the hardest question to answer because I wish it was one thing. I wish I could say to you, go to the store and ask for a probiotic and everything will be wonderful. And one of the reasons why that's so difficult to do is while we typically think of probiotics as one thing, like vitamin D is one thing, or omega-3 DHA is one thing, probiotic is a whole category and even more challenging. It's a category of living organisms. So if we go back to that original definition, we want to make sure they're alive. Well, how do we do that? In the olden days, it used to mean that we only buy our probiotics refrigerated, but now we have the technology to allow them to be healthy and viable on the shelf. So that's really great. How do we know that they are in adequate amounts and that they actually have a health benefit? This is where research is key. And so the most important thing when we're looking for a probiotic is to find a probiotic that does actual human clinical trials on the very same product that you consume. Because one of the things that we find in evidence-based probiotics is that they will use a strain that might have a dozen, 2 dozen, even 100 clinical studies on its use. But then they will take that probiotic and maybe if it was effective at 20 billion, they're like, oh, that's expensive. I'm only going to put 5 billion in my product instead. And just because more is better, I'm going to put like probiotic X and probiotic Y and probiotic Z in it too. And they never actually research that final formula. And so we don't know how that formula works because these are living organisms we're talking about. Do they play well together? Do they actually really hate each other? Does one beat out all the others? So it's really important before we go and grab a probiotic that we actually get on our computers and do a little bit of research. And if that sounds intimidating, which I feel like as a health professional is like we understand the research, but we don't have a ton of time to look up all the research for everything. One of my favorite hacks, which works for health professionals, but also works for anyone listening to this too, is something called the US Probiotic Guide. And it's just usprobioticguide.com. And it's this amazing resource. If not the most beautifully designed, it is very functional, where you can look at all the probiotics on the shelves in the United States and see if they have scientific research and for what. So if you say to yourself, okay, so what's this BioK Plus do? You can go to usprobioticguide.com and you can look up BioK Plus, and you will see that they have level 1 evidence for helping to prevent antibiotic associated diarrhea, which means they have at least one, and there's more, but at least one well-designed randomized controlled trial to say that it does this. And so it makes it easy because not all probiotics have the same activity. So a probiotic for helping you prevent antibiotic associated diarrhea might not be the same probiotic for urinary tract infections, for example. So this allows you to say, what do I need personally? What am I working on? And which probiotics are on the shelves that actually have real research?
I think that's amazing. And we know, with the FDA that our supplements are not, they're not regulated. And so it's very important. And that's why working with a registered dietitian can help a lot so that we can look into a lot of this research. But I think that website is perfect and it gives people, empowers people to be able to look themselves and to see the
Mhm.
research. So if you could talk a little bit about BioK, and I know that they have done so much research for so many years, and dive into a little bit about the strains that they utilize and how they found it, because I know the story behind it. But if you can share with our listeners, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so BioK is really unique. And I think that's one of the things as a registered dietitian, I would never use, nor would I ever recommend a product to someone else that didn't have a really solid evidence base behind it. And BioK Plus really impressed me because at this point, I mean, I've been working with them a long time, so it was less than this, but now in 2025, there's over 25 years of clinical research supporting the product. So we know that it does what it says that it does. But how did we actually find these probiotics? Because it's been around for so long. Like probiotics were not much of a thing when BioK Plus got started. But even more so in the 70s, the strains were discovered. And the strains were discovered because there was a microbiologist studying a neonatal intensive care unit where there were many, many babies getting sick, and one baby not getting sick. You're like, what is it about this baby and this baby's microbiome, AKA poop, that might have helped it resist this infection going around? And what they found were these strains. So they were isolated from a human back in the 70s and studied for almost 2 decades before BioK Plus came into existence. So before they even made a product, there was 2 decades of research to understand, like, what are these bacteria? How do they operate in the human body? Like, what is the impact of them? And there are 3 specific bacteria that you won't find anywhere else but BioK Plus. They have very, very long names, so bear with me. The first is a lactic-acei bacillus casei called LBC80R. You can think of the LBC80R as like the name, like Desiree Nielsen, like human being, Desiree Nielsen. So the LBC80R is like saying Desiree Nielsen. Then there's a lactic-acei bacillus rhamnosus called CLR2 and a lactobacillus acidophilus called CL1285. And you notice there's a lot of lacto there.
Yep.
That lacto means these are lactic acid bacteria. That's what they produce. There are bacteria that produce more gases, like hydrogen gases. Everybody toots. That's where those gases come from. But these are lactic acid producing, which is a short chain fatty acid. So these 3 strains have been researched for 25 years. And the best part is that they're always researched together. So they're not researched separately. We understand that there's a sort of almost synergy between the 3. Like, they all have slightly different roles, and together they're stronger. And the other thing that I really love about BioK is that they're also researched at the very same dosages that the company sells. So again, we know that BioK Plus, its clinical dosage is 50 to 100 billion. 100 billion in practice, I rarely recommend, but 50 billion is its live active dose. And so you can go to the store and buy a 50 billion. You can also buy, a daily care, which is 25 billion. So if you're like, well, I don't have IBS, I don't have anything I'm actively working on, I just want that probiotic support, you can absolutely use a lower dose, but the clinical strength dose is actually what's available on store shelves.
Which is amazing. I love the research behind it. And as you said, as dietitians, we are evidence-based, and there are so many different research trials that don't use the same amount that you're getting. Sometimes they're even used on rats, not humans. So we don't really know how that works. So this is really amazing to have such a quality product that we can count on. So when we're talking about, I mean, we're both women, in the dietetic world, we're a lot of women. How is this helping women's needs?
Yeah. So the original BioK formula has been tested on men, women, and now children throughout the life spectrum so that we know that it's safe and effective for everyone over the age of 2. BioK recently, though, has created a new product that's called Women's Health. So specifically for women's urogenital health. And these are 2 different bacteria, which is really cool because for over 2 decades, it was BioK's original formula and nothing else. But they came into the possession of these incredible strains that were actually discovered and researched by another fellow Canadian, like one of those godfathers of probiotics, Dr. Gregor Reed, an incredible researcher and professor in Ontario. And these are the 2 best researched urogenital strains in the entire world. Over 2 decades, because if BioK is going to do it, like, there's only going to be a lot of research.
Yeah.
So over 2 decades of research behind these strains. And what we know is that they help to keep not only the urinary tract, but also the vaginal flora healthy and balanced, and help you resist what can happen when those 2 things are out of balance.
Thank you for explaining that. And you did talk about the pH. I would love to hear more and
Yeah.
inform our listeners about the pH.
Yeah. So, pH is an interesting thing. If you spend enough time on the apps, you hear about things like acid and alkaline diets, which is it's a whole other webinar. It's a whole other bunk thing. But our body has specific pHs. One of the ways you can think about the human body is we're almost, I mean, not almost, we actually are a little bit of a like chemistry experiment 24/7, right?
Yes.
And so whenever we have these chemical reactions in the body, they all happen at very specific pHs, and a pH is just a measure of how acidic or how basic slash alkaline the environment is. And when I mentioned the three strains in BioK, I talked about the fact that they were lactic acid strains. So they produce lactic acid. And whenever you produce an acid, the environment gets a little bit more acidic. So the pH goes down. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's super cool. The first thing, like a basic thing that no one would ever think about with probiotics, we know that in the colon, when the pH goes down slightly, it actually helps you to absorb more minerals that require a more acidic pH for absorption. For example, calcium and iron. So, like if you're worried, and we should all be worried about our calcium and iron needs, having a healthy pH in the colon does help you get just that little bit more from your nutrition. So, that's really, really cool. But the major thing in regards to the gut microbiome that pH does is that it's almost like a little like assurance of survival. So these microbes, these lactic acid producing microbes, like a slightly more acidic environment. When they produce the acids, they create the pH that they're happy and healthy at. And so by producing these, short chain fatty acids, the healthy microbes that produce short chain fatty acids are happier there, they're stronger, the microbes that are not happy there are the ones that are typically more pro-inflammatory and have more of a negative impact, not just on your gut, but also like in anywhere there's moisture and heat, your urinary tract, your vaginal canal. Having a slightly more acidic pH really helps you resist colonization and overgrowth of the bacteria and the microbes we don't want. So when we have these like lovely lactic acid bacteria, they're acidifying things which help us form one more method of resistance towards the bad bacteria we don't want hanging around.
And that leads me into immunity, right? We know that these gut bacteria can help us. I think 70% of our immune system is housed down in our gut. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Because I think you're leading into that conversation. Would love to talk about our immune system.
Yeah, it is probably the most mind-boggling piece of all of this because when you think immune system, you think, oh, well, your nose or maybe your lungs, because when you get sick, your lungs are impacted. No one's going to think about the deepest, darkest recesses of their colon. Like it's just not going to happen. But it's the giveaway there. Like 70% of your immune activity is centered in and along your gut. Why is that? You really have to have like a fundamental shift in how you think about your gut. Because most of us would think about it, the moms who are like, close your mouth at the table, I can see inside. Like we think about it as inside our body. But in reality, that from the entrance on through the exit of your gut, it is continuous with the outside world. So to your body, to your liver, to your heart, to your bloodstream, your gut is actually the outside world. Just like your skin, the gut becomes a really important barrier between you and the outside world. The difference with your skin, although it does absorb some things, one of the most important jobs of your gut is to be porous enough to let all of that nutrition in. So it's quite thin, it's quite fragile. We do a whole bunch of things to try and protect it. Like we put like this very thick mucus layer. Like we think of mucus being bad, especially because we're talking about immunity, but there's good mucus in your gut. It helps to protect that delicate cell barrier. And then the bacteria in our gut is constantly interacting with all of those immune cells there that are just there doing their job, making sure the outside of the gut stays outside and like no weird stuff happens. And so the kind of bacteria we have in our gut not only influences the integrity of our gut barrier, which is really important for keeping like a calm, measured immune response, but also it's interacting back and forth because the immune system is designed to kill, like seek out and kill germs. And you've got trillions of germs living in your gut. So how the heck does that work? It works because they're always talking. Like your good gut bacteria are literally like waving, right? They're like waving, being like, hey, no problem here. We're the good guys. You don't need to worry about us. And so we see that all of that's wonderful in theory, but we see that there are significant microbiome challenges in folks with immune alterations in general. But specifically, because we're all going back to school, cold and flu season is coming. Our beautiful little children are germ factories. You would probably never expect that probiotics can also be supportive of things like garden variety and cold and flu, because like that's happening up here and that's happening down there. But actually, we have a surprising evidence base to tell us that it helps. The Cochrane reviews, which are like in research, like one of our most prestigious and most trusted sources of like evaluating the literature on any given topic, and they've done it multiple times, and they just updated, I think, in 2022. So the Cochrane review, looking at the research on probiotics and what they call upper respiratory tract infections, so garden variety cold and flu, shows that taking a probiotic is better than placebo at helping to reduce your risk of cold and flu. So it seems like counterintuitive that you might take a gut probiotic to help you prevent cold and flu, but we actually have like a surprising amount of research to say that might be a good idea.
Well, I think it's amazing. And we are going back to school any minute. My daughter's going to be traveling on a plane, and these are already packed in her suitcase. We're really excited to get over to the UK. So it's going to be exciting there. And talk a little bit about the BioK for children, because I think that this is something new and parents learning about probiotics for their children. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I actually have it with me, and you guys are so lucky in the US because you got this first. We're kind of like waiting for it. And so it's really different because if you used to a probiotic, you've seen the BioK in like liquids and you've seen the BioK capsules. This is a little sachet. And so it makes it so, so simple to just like pop it into their food or drink, whatever they're consuming. And this specifically is something with research, again, in kids over 2 to support their immune system. So unlike other probiotics where the focus might be like a digestive issue like IBS, the BioKids is specifically about helping to implement and support and reinforce a healthy immune system for our kids. So it's such a like easy thing to add into their diet. And it's just a little, along with washing your hands, along with like, eating your vitamin
Yeah.
C rich foods and all that good stuff. It's just another little support to help them be more resistant.
That's amazing. Thank you for explaining that. And I love that we do have this new product. It's really exciting. And I know we're going to be able to educate the other dietitians at our big fancy show in October down in Nashville. I can't wait to meet you in person down there. So it's very exciting and cool, like I said, to see all of this research coming out. So I know you talked about being able to absorb the minerals and iron and calcium and getting into the pH levels. Are there any other vitamins and minerals that are created through our gut bacteria?
Yeah. So fermentate, like in addition to being a super microbiome nerd, I'm also a bit of a fermentation nerd. And fermentation is really incredible. And all fermentation is microbes eating. It can seem like a big, long, confusing word, but like fermentation is microbes eating. So feed the probiotics munch them up, and they do this postbiotic thing, which is a result of their fermentation. And so we actually know that fermentation, including the fermentation that happens in your gut, can do a couple of cool things. Like fermentation creates B vitamins, like vitamin B12. It also creates vitamin K. And I know vitamin K is such a hot topic, particularly around bone health. And people are saying, oh, we need vitamin K1, K2. And we get a lot of vitamin K from our greens, but we don't get, which is the K2, the fermentation vitamin K. We get them from our microbes. And so when we have healthy, happy microbes, eating, aka fermentation, we are actually seeing the production. For any one person, we can't tell. I can't be like, you are getting 25 milligrams of vitamin K2 based on your fermentation, but we know that this does occur as a result of fermentation in the human gut.
I don't think a lot of lay people understand that we truly are making vitamins and minerals from our fermentation process. So when we eat, those gut bacteria are breaking down these foods even more to produce those. So it's just, again, like you said, it's a chemistry experiment every single time that we're eating, how it all kind of comes together. Another dietitian told me once, she goes, all I do is look at a plate and see chemicals, and it's not bad chemicals. I know in the US right now, we're all about banning chemicals. So thinking about food in the way of how this works in a science experiment, not necessarily in a bad way.
Yeah.
So,
The vitamin C in your red pepper is a chemical, you know? And so I think it's important to sort of like demystify these
right.
words too, because there's all these chemicals in our body that are meant to be there and all these incredible chemicals in our food that give us health. And it's true that, the microbes are doing all sorts of really wacky and interesting stuff in there. A great example being, because there's also a lot of talk about the gut-brain connection. There's a lot of misinformation and overselling what that is on the apps for sure. But our microbes are producing neurotransmitters. So we all, like the most famous one being serotonin. Some microbes can produce serotonin all themselves. Other microbes can influence our nervous system's production of serotonin, which is really, really cool because we talked about how important the immune system is in the gut, but the gut is also heavily innervated. Like it has a lot of nerve cells. It actually has more nerve cells than your spinal cord. We call it the enteric nervous system. And it does a lot of very, very important to the gut things. Like as soon as we chew and swallow our food, chew your food well, by the way, gut health dietitian always has to get that in. But as soon as we swallow, we give up conscious control of everything that happens. And our gut is a muscle. This rhythmic wave is what's responsible to move food down, hopefully not too quick, not too slow, but that movement is called peristalsis, and that's governed by the nervous system. And the serotonin in our gut, and I love to sort of myth bust this because people will be like, mental health, serotonin, 95% of the serotonin is produced in our gut. Therefore, the two go together. And they're like, yes, but no, because the serotonin produced in our gut doesn't cross the gut-brain barrier, but that doesn't mean it doesn't influence our nervous system. And a really important thing for like anyone with IBS in the crowd is that particularly in diarrhea predominant IBS, too much serotonin in our gut can hasten that really sort of like rapid, urgent bowel. And so knowing that the right microbes can help influence the appropriate production of serotonin in the gut is one more reason why probiotics might be the right probiotic, might be also of use in IBS-D.
And that's where, for people that don't know IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome, and back when I first started in nutrition in 2001, we would say like, well, it's a diagnosis of, we don't know what's wrong with you. So you have something going on. And I think now we can say in a lot of cases there really is help for IBS. And just like you're saying, that if we can get the right microbiome and the right gut bacteria and the right probiotics and the right fiber sources, we really can have an impact and really help people's lives.
Yeah, and it's for me too, when we were talking before that like I right out of the gate as a dietitian, I worked in a health food store, and the thing that I was talking about the most with people in the aisles every single day was gut health. And I felt so overwhelmed and so unprepared by my degree. Again, in 2008, like gut health was like not a household word. And so talking about IBS, I'm like, what is it? We don't know. Is it the microbiome? Like, is it a food intolerance? Like, we don't know. We have so much knowledge now. And for any one person, it's still we don't exactly know what's going on, but we have, again, these pillars or these tools in our toolkit. Like we know FODMAPs, for example, those fermentable. So again, that word ferment, that was fermentable carbohydrates that an intolerance can hasten people's symptoms in IBS. Like that's one thing, that gut-brain connection. So the nervous system and stress and the way things move too fast or too slow is another pillar of IBS, but the microbiome is absolutely a pillar in IBS, particularly post-infectious. So like the person who goes down to Mexico and gets hit, or you just get hit with food poisoning in your own home. It's barbecue season, like the mayo has been out on the picnic table for 8 hours. Don't do it. But those kind of incidents can end up for some people in IBS. And so we know there's a really strong microbiome component too. And that's where a probiotic, one specifically with evidence for IBS, can be super, super helpful as one of the pillars as you're getting all of the things in order.
Something, and you just brought to mind antibiotic use.
Yes.
So this is a big this is a big
Yeah.
one, and hence of kind of like how we got my daughter, and we were going back in the timeline of what happened to her, and she was on antibiotic for an ear infection. Ice cream came into her life. She went on a cruise with my brother, and I think they lived on ice cream for an entire week. Hence, like everything kind of got a little messed up. So
Yeah.
explain how BioK Plus can truly help if you're having to take an antibiotic, how
Mm.
that can affect the micro gut biome, and explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So, this is one where there is so much confusion and misunderstanding, not just in the public, but also in the research and also with health professionals. So I'll say a couple of things. One, antibiotics are incredible life-saving medications. If you need one, you need to take it, and you need
Yeah.
to take it fully as directed. Like don't stop early, because what you're doing is not killing all the microbes, and the ones that survive are the ones that are a little bit resistant to that antibiotic in the first place, and that's a huge issue. But we also have to have a lot of respect for how these broad spectrum antibiotics work, and that they are indiscriminate. They're a bull in a china shop. They kill the bad guys by attempting to kill everything in their presence. And so what happens when we take a broad spectrum antibiotic is we wipe out the bad guys, but also a lot of the good guys. And when we do that, the good guys are what help us resist the bad guys. That's what helps keep our gut functioning properly and resisting harmful microbes and improving our immune system. So when we create this vacuum of good guys, like they're just not enough of them to keep the peace, that's when what we call opportunistic pathogens. If you get the opportunity, you cause the disease. Things like E. coli, which lots of us have E. coli sitting in our gut, and it's totally fine because our gut microbiome is healthy. They just hang out in the corners and they don't cause too much trouble because they know they won't get a chance. But when we take a broad spectrum antibiotic, they get the chance. And a lot of folks after antibiotics get diarrhea. They get loose poops called antibiotic associated diarrhea. Super, super common side effect that can even lead to things like IBS, or down the road, like you mentioned, with your daughter and her SIBO, her small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We also have research to suggest that kids who get a ton of antibiotics are at more risk for multiple things later on in life, but things like eczema, things like the inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. So we know we have to have a lot of respect for how they work, but also how can we improve the microbiome after. And this is where something like BioK Plus comes in, because again, not all probiotics will be effective against those opportunistic bad guys in the same way. And one of the first things that was discovered about how BioK Plus works is that it appears to be really good at killing off things like E. coli, which is a very frequent flyer in the baddie department, as well as C. diff, which is one of those like sort of antibiotic resistant superbugs that can be really, really nasty for folks. And so there is actually human clinical data to show that when you take BioK in a very specific way, it helps decrease the risk of AAD by 65% and the risk of this C. diff, like this awful superbug diarrhea, by 95%. It is astounding to see how it works. The key is, and this is what people get messed up all the time, don't wait till after the antibiotics are done. Prime thing, when your doctor hands you a prescription for an antibiotic, you want to go to the pharmacy, you want to pick it up, and on the same day, you want to pick up your BioK Plus. And it's also very counterintuitive. You're like, well, aren't the antibiotics going to kill it? You can think of them as like we're sacrificing them a little bit to keep the peace until the antibiotics are done and your own normal bacteria can bounce back. So you take BioK, you just want to separate it. If you take your antibiotic at 7 a.m., you wait till 9 a.m. to take your BioK. You take it every day that you're taking antibiotics, plus 5 days after as a little buffer. And that's exactly the protocol that was done in the research to produce those great results.
I'm really glad we dove into that because
Yeah.
I think that that is going to help prevent a lot of different gut dysbiosis in the future. And I don't think a lot of people know that they should be taking a probiotic and
Yeah.
specifically a BioK Plus and those strains being tested. So I'm so grateful that we just touched on that. Is there anything else you want to discuss? I mean, we could go, the two of us could
I
go
know.
on and on and on.
Hours.
I know.
Hours.
We love this. What else do you want to bring up and teach people today?
Yeah. So a couple of things. The first is, and I touched on it before, which is constipation. A little bit out of left field, I know, but constipation is such an issue and that it's so normalized. I would say to anyone watching this, if you're not having like a good poop every day, like we're going to go there. If you're not having like a good solid poop every day, you might want to see a dietitian. And first, like let's check the fiber issue. But microbes can be an underlying cause. And we see this in our practice all the time where I will have someone come in, they're like, I'm doing the chia seeds and like I eat all the kale and all the lentils. Why am I so constipated? And it can be a microbiome issue. Dr. Mark Pimentel out of Cedars-Sinai in LA, he's been such a pioneer in doing this work. And he's shown that a type of microbe called a methanogen is linked to chronic constipation. So it's just like methane gas. We've heard about it being in the atmosphere. It's also in our guts, hopefully in very small amounts, but when it's in larger amounts, you mentioned the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We have this new term called intestinal methanogen overgrowth because they're actually not bacteria. They're archaea. They're like sort of like bacteria, but not quite. They're a totally different thing. And so when we have these methane bacteria, it can actually cause a lot of constipation that's hard to fix with diet. So if you've done all the diet things with your dietitian, that's when it might be time to go back to your doctor and be like, is this a microbe issue? And there are potentially probiotics that can be supportive of that as well to help shift that microbiome too. So yeah, definitely think if there's anything happening in the poop department, diarrhea, 100% always microbiome, but also constipation too. So yeah, any sort of like garden variety gut health, if it's bothering you on a daily basis, really be curious about it. Go see your dietitian, see what needs to shift in your diet, but also seriously consider a probiotic because it might be a microbiome issue too.
I'm really glad you touched on that because it is affecting. I think the latest statistic in the US is 70% of Americans are dealing with a digestive disorder.
Yeah.
70%.
Well, when 95% of us aren't hitting our fiber targets, like we are so into protein, and I absolutely,
I
as a
know.
woman in her 40s, I hear it. I have taken the advice and I feel a little better. But far more critical is the fact that we're not consuming fiber, not just for our microbiome, but the health of our gut itself, colorectal cancer, all of those things. And also, when we're bloated and constipated, we just feel awful. Like, no one's like, I'm going to go and have the best day ever when you haven't had a poop in 4 days.
No, and we really can help to prevent that. And I'm really glad you've touched on that too. Is there anything else that you want to discuss today? Because I mean, we have really gone through mental health. We've talked about women's health. We've talked about constipation, GI health. And I think hopefully for our listeners that are on this webinar or listening to the recording, that you see how tied that microbiome is to all of these different things and how BioK Plus can truly help with a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I think that's the most important take home message is that, this is a new pillar alongside our eating, alongside our movement, alongside our sleep and our stress. the microbiome is a pillar that we don't want to ignore. And if everything is feeling amazing, great. Maybe we want a probiotic to help us with prevention during cold and flu season. But if anything is off, the microbiome and, potentially a probiotic like BioK Plus should absolutely be like one of the first things on our list in terms of trying.
I love it. So where can we go to find you? Because I'd love to promote you as well. You're an incredible dietitian.
Thank you. Yeah. So I am online with lots of very high fiber recipes at DesireeRD.com. So RD like registered dietitian. And then I'm on Instagram at Desiree Nielsen RD, and then TikTok, Desiree Nielsen Nutrition.
I love it. And you can go to BioK, look up BioK, go on Instagram, also go on the website. You can find it at your local grocery store. You can find it at a health food store. We're so excited in the US to have it all over the place.
Yeah.
And you can find out more information if you go there too. And I'm at kellyschoice.org here in the US. And I cannot, like I said, wait to meet you in person. And I hope that all of our listeners gain some information today. And I appreciate you taking the time to be with us, Desiree. And thank you to BioK for putting this webinar on today. So thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic day.